All right. Welcome back to Ask Coach Nate, episode 26. Today, we're going to discuss optimizing race day nutrition. So, Nate, with races coming back, events coming back, I'm sure a lot of people out there who have been training over the past year are excited to get back out there and start performing. So, what advice do you have for people who want to optimize nutrition, particularly when it comes around race day?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think it depends a little bit on like your fitness level and what kind of event you're training for. But usually, most bike races, whether you're doing crits or mountain bike races or time trials or road races, like the biggest determining factor on your ability to perform on a particular day is going to be your carbohydrate stores going into the race, so your muscle glycogen and how much carbohydrate you had after your last hard training sessions, and a little bit maybe if you had like some carbs in one or two meals after your last training sessions, but recovery from your last session so that you have plenty of muscle glycogen. And then, also like hydration status, especially if it's like a longer event and you might get dehydrated, sweating a lot throughout the course of that event. Or if it's dry and you're training hard, getting enough salt in your diet generally so that you can absorb and retain water. So in general, yeah, like you want to be well recovered with lots of carbs after your last training sessions. And when you're racing, you want to take in carbs in proportion to how long and hard the event will be. And especially if you're racing from day to day, that becomes increasingly important as well.
Hey, what I want to know is, what do you eat the night before a race, and then what do you eat race day?
So I definitely am way less concerned about like the morning of the race than most people. I more or less don't even think about it because it's like, let's say I have a race on Saturday. Probably I'll do my last training session on like Wednesday or Thursday, depending on how much I care about that race and how fresh I want to be for it. Like I'll do some hard workout earlier in the week, but I'll have at least 1 or 2 days easy. And I'll still be training probably those days and do like an hour or two, just kind of easy riding, like easy endurance riding. But I'll definitely, let's say I do a hard workout on Wednesday. Immediately when I get home, even if it was just like 2.5 hours with intervals, I'll probably have 600 to 800 calories within 20 minutes of getting home. Like I'll have like a shake with some cereal and a lot of easy to digest carbs and fluids and electrolytes. I'll have another carb rich snack after that. By dinner time, I care a little bit less how much I'm getting in. It's mostly just like if I can get most of that in the first few hours after coming home. And then the same thing on Thursday and Friday. Even if I just do an hour or two easy, I'll have a good carb-rich recovery snack in the next meal, like right when I get home. But I care less about like the dinner that might happen 3 or 4 or 5 hours after my training session than I do about those first couple of snacks when I get home. But if I had Thursday and Friday pretty easy, and I had, let's say, 150 to 200 grams of carbohydrate in the first 3 hours after that training session, I don't care a lot about that last dinner. If I can feel that I'm still kind of tired from my hard training like days before, I might have a few extra carbs. So like probably my favorites are like Thai food or Chinese food, where there's rice or there's noodles and it's like rich in carbs. It's pretty easy to digest and has lots of salt. So I'm going to like really retain a lot of water going into the race. So I'm like extra hydrated. That I think is the perfect kind of pre-race meal if you want to really top off the day before in your last, evening meal. But you don't want it to be like so big that you go to bed with a full stomach and you don't sleep well, for example. Like you want it to be plenty of carbs, but comfortable. And during the last day, having like really high fat, high fiber meals are not going to be the most helpful because you just don't want like you don't want to have like a huge salad, for example. Like I love huge salads. I have them all the time, but I will definitely not do that like the night before a race because it's like you don't want a lot of stuff in your digestive system that's just like slowing things down and making you feel full when you race the
Yeah,
next day.
too much fiber.
Yeah.
What is a carb-rich snack for you?
I mean, usually bananas, oatmeal, some kind of cereal if I'm really trying to like fuel a lot of intense workouts or races. If sometimes bread, I'm not like a big bread or pasta person, but sometimes like if we have some good bread from the market, I'll have that. I'll maybe like make some toast with olive oil and salt and pepper and like an egg on the top or something like that. But I don't know. Those are some of my go-tos. Sometimes we'll have rice, but the only time I'll really have a lot of bread or rice or pasta is like if I'm doing really hard training day after day, or I'm racing day after day, or I'm like maybe trying to top off right before a race, and I'll have like I said, like Thai food or Chinese food, or like a stir fry that we make at home, and has like some rice or rice cakes or something with it.
What do you eat during the race?
Yeah, so that is a great question. It depends on what the race is. Longer races, I think for most people, like you can't have too much carbohydrate. Like you can have more than you can like comfortably digest, but you could have 100, you could have 200, you have 250 calories of carbs per hour. And if you're comfortable with 250 calories of carbs per hour, like you can get that through, drink mix, maybe part of a bar, maybe a gel. If you can digest that comfortably, I would probably go ahead and have that much if you are an athlete that has a threshold of like 250 to 300 watts, and you're going to burn a lot of fuel doing like a 4-hour road race. If you're doing a crit and it's just 45 to 75 minutes long, there's no way that you're going to run out of carbohydrate in your muscles during that time, but it is helpful to have a drink mix as opposed to just water, because you'll absorb the fluid more quickly, you'll retain it better because you'll have sodium in there. So if you're sweating a lot, which most of the time you are during crit, that'll help with hydration, and also having some carbohydrates coming in, it'll definitely help. So you're not quite as constrained by fuel at the end of the race. Like you won't totally exhaust your glycogen stores, but as you get lower and lower, like it's harder to put out really high power, even if you're just half or 2/3 glycogen depleted. So if you have 100 or 200 calories in the form of a drink mix or some gels throughout the course of a crit, the last 2 laps when it's really fast and hard, you'll be a little bit more capable of exerting yourself. And there's interesting studies where people will even just take drink mix into their mouth and spit it out. And just the awareness that you have something sweet in your mouth and your brain thinks that you have carbohydrates available, it frees up your nervous system to exert yourself at a slightly higher rate. So I'm not advocating for like spitting out drink mix in the middle of a crit, but it makes sense that from those studies, like you'll expect to have higher power at the end of a crit if you're drinking drink mix than if you were drinking water. And
Yeah,
especially if you're doing like multiple crit fields, like you're racing at 11 and then at 2, or if you're racing on Saturday and then on Sunday, the the less you finish that race in a hole, the better you'll be the next day for sure.
yeah, those studies are really interesting, where they did a lot of research in depth on hydration with IVs and all of that. If you haven't ever looked it up, you should go and take a look. Some of the conclusions are pretty interesting. I can't remember, did I share that book with you?
Which one?
Where they had done, I think it's called Endurance, where they had done in the Netherlands. They'd done a lot of testing with cycling, or cyclists regarding hydration, and they were hydrating them through drinking, and then hydrating through IVs. And yeah, there was a difference actually between the people who like drank the water versus the people who actually were hydrated. And the psychological impact of a lot of this stuff is significant.
Yeah.
There was a difference between the two. You mentioned like having more drink tablets the other day, and so I've been actually increasing my salt intake for recovery, and it's made a big difference. I drink less water. I would drink like one bottle with some mix, and then I would drink a lot of water, and I felt really thirsty, and I would drink like a lot, like 3 or 4, or I don't know, 5 bottles of water. Now if I have like 2 bottles of mix, or add 2 tablets to a bottle, I actually feel like I absorb the liquid or the water more effectively, and
Yeah.
I'm not as thirsty later. So worked for me.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, most people really can't, like, unless it's the winter and it's cold out and you're barely sweating because it's like 40 degrees out. If it's the spring and summer and it's 60, 70, 80 degrees, like you will be sweating out more salt than you can take in reasonably in any drink mix or gel or food format. So it's like in general, especially if it's medium to longer duration rides or races, having some sort of mix, whether it's just electrolytes or it's electrolytes and calories, is definitely going to enhance your hydration status and your performance over the course of that session. And again, if you finish your ride really glycogen depleted or really dehydrated, It's not necessarily intrinsically bad. Like sometimes those stresses can be helpful because it helps your body to adapt, but it takes longer to recover from that. So if you're trying to train day after day or you're trying to race day after day, it really is helpful to not finish in such a huge hole. And so hydration is important so that you don't have to like regain, liters of fluid that you lost after your training session and grams of sodium. Because like over the course of a 5-hour ride, you can lose like multiple grams of sodium that it's hard to replenish if you aren't taking it in when you're riding.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard a lot of stories about people getting water poisoning, cycling like in the heat in the summer, and also people who like. I had a friend who I cycled with, and he definitely consumed a lot more salt than I did, and he felt it helped with cramps. So everyone's different, right? And so trying to experiment with what works for you
Yeah.
uh, makes a lot of sense. All right, so race day, what do you think people are? So what do you recommend, or like what do you use? So a couple hundred grams of carb, depending on your ability tolerance. Do you
Calories. Yeah.
do you like gels or bars, or do you make your own
So I
snacks?
would, so um, something you said a second ago reminded me of like I love using training as a way to practice for racing or doing an event, like whether you're racing or you're doing like a century ride or like a gravel event that may or may not be constructed as like an official race. um, Whenever you're trying to really exert yourself and the stakes are higher to you, it makes sense to practice things in training that you can just keep doing the same thing or a very similar thing in racing. So I personally find that I can tolerate most foods and gels and drink mixes pretty well. So usually if I'm racing or I'm doing really hard training sessions, and especially if it's hot out, I'll start with a couple of bottles of mix and I'll take electrolyte tablets with me so I can keep getting sodium, later into my rides. And the same thing in races, but it's harder to like you can't really put tablets into your bottle. Like if you get a water bottle in the middle of a race at the feed zone, like you can't just open the top and put a tablet in there very easily. Although I'm pretty sure I have done that because sometimes races are not that technical where you could do that. But gels are great, drink mixes are great. Both of those tend to be for most people the most easily digested and most quickly absorbed forms of refueling. Bars can be nice because it makes you feel like you have something in your stomach, but it's going to be slower to enter your bloodstream and get digested and used as fuel. So that can be more helpful for like longer races if you don't appreciate only taking fluids for like 3 or 4 or 5 hours during like a road race or a gravel race or something like that. But usually I think I would go for, I'll start most road races, let's say, with like a few bars, 3 or 4 gels, and a couple bottles of mix, and then get water bottles along the way and spread it out so that I'm getting 200, 250 calories of carbohydrate per hour throughout the event.
Yeah, and so
And
uh,
keep in mind, my threshold is like pretty high, so I know that I can be burning 1,000 calories or more per hour. But for smaller athletes or people who are not as fit, and they know that their threshold is like let's say 150 watts or 200 watts, they might be burning like 500 or 600 calories per hour. In which case, taking in 200 calories per hour might be helpful, but it might be more than you need because you're just not burning like that much fuel. But even people that are like newer, smaller in size and don't have as much muscle mass and have put out less power, I would still do at least 100 to 150 calories per hour of carbohydrate,
yeah,
maybe
I
200 or
don't eat
more.
as much as other people. I'm a little bit shorter than you, and I probably weigh less. So,
It doesn't matter the size. Like the size is just a proxy for knowing how much power you put out. But if you have a power meter, like you know how many calories you're
well, I
burning.
definitely don't put out as
So
much power as you either. So,
yeah,
so anyway, so well, we got that clear. And then like, but even other people I race with, like I consume some food, but I didn't typically eat as much as other
some
people.
people.
Which worked for me. I mean, I still would
Yeah,
bring gels and bars. I like, don't get me wrong, like
yeah.
the nutrition part is really important. But like, I'm trying to think. I did a couple races where more like 100 calories an hour, which actually isn't that much, right? It's like one gel
Yeah.
an hour. And there was other people I would race with who were like similar size to me. And that was what we felt like worked well race day. Training is a little bit different. I like solid food. It feels better. But like racing, it's so intense and I'm so focused and I didn't want to deal with with anything. I would even have the gels open or
Yeah.
any food, everything open, so it's just ready to go, so I don't have to think about it. I even experimented with like because I did electrolyte drinks, but calorie drinks too, so I didn't have to think too much about the eating piece.
Yeah.
That was really helpful.
That's really
Uh,
helpful for people that don't want to think about remembering to grab a bar or a gel. And also if you're doing like a crit or a mountain bike race where sometimes the technicality of the course might prevent you from being able to easily handle anything more complicated than just grabbing your bottle. Because like reaching into your pocket, opening up
yeah,
the package, putting the wrapper back in your pocket when you're done with it, if you don't want to litter, like those things can be challenging if you're maneuvering throughout the course. It is interesting. Like some people, yeah, it's definitely comfortable and it's definitely very productive to have, let's say, 100 calories per hour. But if you're doing a road race that's going to take you like 4 hours or longer, and let's say your threshold is like mid 200 watts, that's like pretty common for a lot of like fit female cyclists or like moderately fit guy cyclists. Like that's enough that you're probably burning during a race like 700 to 800 calories per hour when you're racing. And over the course of like 2 hours, you're not going to run through your glycogen stores. Having some carbohydrate is helpful at the very least, just because your brain knows that it's available because you're eating it and you can taste it. But if you're doing like 3 hours and 4 hours in, you'll be getting low on glycogen. So more than 100 calories per hour is probably useful if you are doing an event that's going to take you 4 hours or longer. On the other hand, it is good to know that, past 300 to 400, like somewhere in that range is pretty much the maximum that most people can absorb. So even if you're doing something like an Ironman triathlon and you're trying to like throttle yourself for like 10 or 12 or more hours, like taking in more than 350 per hour is probably not helping you in any way except by just adding stress to your digestive system. So I think that people will often eat less than they should and they're underfueling and they're underperforming as a result. And some people just arbitrarily eat like as much as they can handle on all of their training sessions and all of their races, and they might not be getting any more benefit than they would if they just had 2 to 250 calories per hour.
yeah, it's funny too. I also found in racing like it's pretty intense, and so like trying to remember to eat was actually a bigger problem than you think it would.
Yeah, that's a good thing to draw attention to because I think a lot of people, especially if they're getting into racing from scratch, or right now, a lot of people that haven't raced for a year and they're not in the routine of like having those habits reinforced because they haven't been racing every few weeks for a while and they're just going back to their first race in over a year, like in a week or two. Like oftentimes looking at the course that you're riding and seeing where the descents are, where the long straightaways are, where there's not going to be a lot of action during the race, where you would have a few moments to eat. It's nice to think ahead and plan for the opportunities that you'll have to easily refuel. And a lot of times, the obvious places would be if you have like a good climb and then there's like a plateau before a descent. Oftentimes, in those few seconds going over the top, you can like get out a bar, take a bite, and then on the way down you can be like chewing it and swallowing it because you aren't pedaling during that time. But if you identify a few spots where you just plan ahead of time, it makes it easier because you're not trying to remember. You just already had made the decision, oh, like 45 minutes in I'm going to go down this descent, I'll just like eat a bar at that time.
Yeah, I'm trying. Some of the races in California can be really hot out in the location where they have like in the interior of the state where it's like much hotter than it is in the Bay Area where we live. And I've experimented too with like bringing extra water.
Yeah.
So I've started out with like a third water bottle in my jersey pocket that I would ditch later so that I just had additional water. Cause like sometimes getting to the water zone can be chaotic, especially in like the early laps where there's a lot of people. And I wanted to kind of like avoid that and get an advantage over the other riders. So that's worked for me. And then I could just ditch the bottle whenever I feel like it and then get a bottle on like the second or third lap when there's like less chaos
Yeah.
happening on the feed zone. I think in the earlier categories too, that's definitely a place where there's a lot of crashing and a lot of like mishaps. So that worked for me. I
Yeah.
didn't always do it, but yeah, I had some success with
That's
that.
really helpful if it's really hot for sure. And if it doesn't start with like a steep climb right out of the gate. But
Yeah,
I've even done that in a crit multiple times. I've
yeah,
started with 3 bottles. So like namely the 4th of July crit in Davis. Obviously it's in the middle of summer and it has been like 100 plus there a few times. And if you're in the 1, 2, 3 crit, or the 1-2 crit rather, it's like, I forget, 75 minutes, 90 minutes, like it's long. And if it's 100 degrees and you're riding hard for that length of time, like you can sweat a bunch, and it's not like you're going to get super dehydrated over that amount of time, but your heart is working harder to pump all of that blood to your skin to dump all that heat into the environment. So I would start with like a bottle of mix, a bottle of ice water, and then another bottle in my back pocket. And I would use one of the bottles just to like pour over myself while I drank the mix. So I probably over the course of the race would dump 2 full bottles over my body to stay cool while drinking 1 bottle of mix to fuel myself throughout the work. And it worked effectively because I was able to win it one year. Obviously, racing's dynamic, so you can't really ensure that you do or don't win, but hopefully you take care of yourself so you can take advantage of the opportunities as they present themselves. But the same thing at nationals when I got 5th at the TT, it was like 90 something degrees, 90% humidity because it's like in the South that year. And I think one reason why I did well was because I was like warming up, but I was also putting like ice water over me the whole time I was warming up. And when I went to the start, I had a bottle, like I 10 minutes before I went to the start, I was drenched with ice water. When I rolled up to the start, I had a bottle that I waited until like a minute before to pour over myself. And then I started. So I was sopping wet with ice cold water at the start of this like 43-minute time trial or around there. And then I had a bottle of water that I like sipped from to keep my mouth from drying out. And I poured over myself. So like the first lap, I was comfortable and damp. By the end of the second lap, I had dried off, and so I like poured some more water over me, sipped some, and then tossed my bottle, and then finished on the third lap and got 5th.
There you go. Well, yeah, when I dumped water over me, I did not win. So I don't know if that tip will work for everybody.
It
You
can
know,
help you to perform better though if you are like actually just really hot because it's like really fucking hot outside. People don't do that enough. I find like I've seen a lot of people do like climbing races and they're drinking, they're hydrating, but they're salty and dry, and their heart rate is higher than it needs to be. And if you can have access to extra water, oftentimes it can be helpful if it's exceptionally hot.
yeah, it's funny. Like it just started to heat up again, and I was at the track the other day running, and it's exposed to the sun. There's not a lot of shade, and so I think like the third or fourth interval that I was doing, I needed the water to just get the sweat and the salt out of my eyes because my I was sweating so much and my eyes started to irritate, and the water helped a lot, and then it cooled me down as well. So I've had to do that and like hill climbing. It's funny. It's like as the weather starts to heat up, I remember all these things that I was doing last summer that were not an issue while training all winter, where it's been pretty cold. Training early in the morning. Well, what other race day nutrition tips do you have? Anything specific?
Yeah, so I think, going to the race fed but comfortable, like just have a light breakfast, have usually like 150 to 250 calories per hour, have some electrolytes, have plenty of fluid. I would usually bring some sort of a snack so that when you're at the race after you finish, you can start snacking and refueling and recovering right away, especially if you drove someplace that's like a little bit remote and there's not an obvious easy place to just pick up a snack right after the race. It's helpful if you just have that with you already. Um, because most of the time it's like you have an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours drive home, and you don't want to like get a bag of chips at the gas station and then drive and have your first meal 2 hours later. Because like once the race is done, that's great. Now you have like your next workout to look forward to, your next race or whatever it is. So refueling as quickly as possible right afterwards, just like you would after any workout. I find that a lot of people don't think about that ahead of time, and they like finish their race and then they're like looking for a sandwich shop, and then 45 minutes later they find a sandwich shop and they have that, and then it's like 3 hours later after the race they're at home eating their first like proper meal, and so they missed an opportunity to jumpstart their recovery right after the race.
What do you bring for a recovery meal?
um a lot of times I'll have like a couple of bars, so yeah, like a couple of bars, maybe a protein shake, and probably another bottle of drink mix. So I'll probably have 700 to 1,000 calories of mostly carbs, 30 to 40 grams of protein, and plenty of fluid that I can have in the first like hour or two after. And a lot of times, like if it was really hot out because it was like a Central Valley road race in, June or something like that, we might stop and get gas, and like I'll get a cold drink along the way if I felt like I was still thirsty. Because like really, I've done some testing just in warm weather, like weighing myself before and after training, and also like on the trainer when there's not a lot of wind cooling. And it's like you can lose so much fluid, but like I think the most extreme cases, I was riding in DC for like 2.5 hours and I had 2 bottles, and that's exactly the amount of fluid that I drank. And I lost 10 pounds over the course of this like 2.5 hour ride in like 90-degree weather. And it's like that's a lot of fluid. That's like a gallon of fluid that you need to replenish. And that's hard to do. And so just like the 1 bottle that you have after your race, it's not enough if you are doing like a road race in the heat.
Yeah, I always felt that was a challenge, was bringing enough water for
Yeah.
the recovery. Well, that's a great tip, right? Bring as much water as you can possibly bring
Yeah.
for your recovery. Well, hey, any final words?
No, I don't know. Just practice stuff in training so you know what you can do in race day. And race day doesn't have to be any different than all of your training sessions. You might just go into it, 20% fresher than your regular workout, and you might eat just a little bit more, but don't change everything drastically just because you're nervous about a race. Just think about the fact that you've done things dozens and dozens of times before for your workouts, and just do the same thing again, but maybe just tweak it a little bit for race day.
Well, yeah, I agree. I think I'm all prepared for race season. I'm looking forward to events starting up again. So
Yeah, me too.
like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you guys back here next week.
Bye. Thanks.